Hey guys, welcome to my guide that will teach you how to use burst counters. They are extremely useful, and they will aid you in effectively handling the various enemies that Nioh 2 has, but they can be tricky to understand. To make the learning process easier, I'm going to build off some concepts from my parry guide. Let's begin by diving right into general information about burst counters. First things first, burst counters cost 1 anima to use. However, in the Dark Realm, the cost is negated because pulling one off there grants you a serious anima boost. Second, assuming you are using the default control scheme, you can activate a burst counter by pressing R2 and circle. I'd recommend priming the ability with R2 and then pressing circle when you need to. Third, each burst counter has a unique secondary use. More on that later. In case you didn't know, you can use burst counters to cancel almost anything, but be wary. Using a burst counter will leave you briefly vulnerable to enemy attacks. However, if you can deplete a yokai's maximum ki to 0, or just deplete a human's ki to 0, with a burst counter, then you can pull off a sick yokai grapple. You may ask yourself, why bother using a burst counter if I can just avoid a burst attack? The answer is simple. The game heavily incentivizes using burst counters with some amazing perks in the Shifling tree. The special finesse passives greatly improve your burst counters. On a successful burst counter, you will gain nearly all your ki back, restore a modest chunk of health if you're low, boost damage for your next yokai ability, and enhance ki recovery speed all at the same time. It is ridiculous. But enough of me shilling for burst counters. Let's investigate the Phantom burst counter. The Phantom burst counter is basically a shield you hold up for a brief period of time. Here's the animation slowed down so you can get a feel for what it's like. In my opinion, the Phantom type is the baseline for learning how to burst counter. The overall timing is most similar to Timely Guard, in which you need to block just before you feel an attack is going to connect. In fact, the Phantom doubles as a block and can be treated and used as such. Let's break it down on a standard Yoki burst. Pay attention to how late I pop it, and make sure to burst counter just before the attack will hit. Let's see that again. Remember to burst counter just before you feel the attack will hit you. You want the shield to sync with the enemy burst. Let's see it once more in real time so you can get used to the overall timing. If your burst counter fully depletes enemy ki, you have the option to follow up with a yokai grapple. Pulling off the Phantom counter can be tricky at times. Even though it functions as a timely guard, you may find yourself popping it too early. In that case, you can oftentimes get hit by other attacks and rapidly lose ki. Make sure to wait until the last moment to use it. It works extremely well against burst attacks that home in on you, and those that require quick responses. Last thing, anytime you use the Phantom burst, you will unsheath your weapon. Let's move on to the Feral burst counter. The Feral burst counter is unique in that you need to connect your after images with the enemy attacks. There are 2 of them, one from roughly where you started, and one in between your starting and stopping points. You can use the Feral counter in any direction to dodge just about anything. However, the Feral counter will only trigger if you move in a forward direction. Any other direction merely functions as a dodge. As I mentioned, you can use the Feral counter as an extra dodge. What's nice is that you won't lose much ki. The downside is that you may reposition yourself in a less than desirable manner. But because you leave 2 after images at slightly different intervals, it'll feel like you have a decently sized window to pull off the Feral counter. The timing for the Feral burst counter is slightly earlier than the Phantom burst counter. Think of it like how the Spear's twirl is earlier than most parries. The objective is to connect either one of your after images with the enemy burst attack. Sometimes you can throw it out last minute and still connect with the first one. Let's see it in real time. It helps to reposition yourself in advance to make sure you get a solid connect. If you deplete enemy ki completely using a Feral counter, then you can Feral grapple. Also, if you were sheathed beforehand, then you'll stay sheathed. If you had your weapon out, then it will stay out. The Feral counter has the advantage of being able to dodge through attacks and still connect with a burst attack, but make sure you position yourself properly. The last thing, you can sometimes treat this like the Phantom burst because you leave 2 after images. It's risky, and when you do pull off connecting the first after image, you might end up a little further away than you might like. Let's see this one last time before we move on to the final burst counter type. the Brute. The Brute burst counter is the most unique of the 3 burst counter types. It's an aggressive swipe with a decent amount of range. Let's see it again from the usual angle so you become familiar with it. As you can see here, it's a pretty quick attack. In fact, it doubles as a nice extra attack, and you can do a bunch of really cool things with it. The Brute counter is an interrupt. There is no real timing element to it whatsoever. Basically, if you see red, just smash the Brute counter. You can be very, very aggressive with it. As with the other burst counter types, once you fully deplete enemy ki with the Brute counter, you can follow up with a yokai grapple. Also of note, the Brute counter will sheath your weapon, for whatever reason, so you can follow up with quick draws pretty easily. It excels at stopping bursts with long windups. If you're comfortable with trading damage, the Brute may be the type for you. When you know an enemy's attack patterns, the Brute can effectively allow you to shut down an enemy burst right as it comes out. Playing proactively with the Brute feels really, really awesome. But a lot of the times, this is insanely risky, as many bursts require strict timing and positioning. This is not the Brute's forte at all, and in situations that require immediate responses, the Brute will fail miserably. It takes roughly half of a second for it to come out, so you must be early for many quick bursts. Despite this major disadvantage, there are some burst attacks that are exclusive to being countered by the Brute. Guardian Spirit related bursts usually qualify. Unfortunately, the setback I just talked about is worth repeating. The Brute counter is terrible at anything requiring quick reflexes. So quick little recap. You have the Phantom type, which doubles as a block and has similar timing to the Timely Guard, in which you pop it just before you feel an attack is going to hit you. You have the Feral type, which doubles as a dodge and has slightly earlier timing like the Twirl does, in which you need to have at least one of your 2 after images connect with an enemy attack. Lastly, you have the Brute type, which doubles as an attack and is best at interrupting burst attacks before they can hit you. And that's it. These burst counters are immensely valuable. They can seriously boost your play by not only stopping threatening burst attacks, but also by allowing you to keep the pressure going. I have to admit, at first I was reluctant to use them, but now I find them staples of Nioh 2 combat, especially with the handy secondary uses. I grew to really enjoy them, and I'm sure you will too. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate all the support you've given me, and I'll see everyone next time.